Picture a Monday evening, a hockey rink, the smell of cold air and fresh ice. Parents in the bleachers, jackets zipped up, coffee cups warming their hands. Picture a Monday evening, a hockey rink, the smell of cold air and fresh ice. Parents in the bleachers, jackets zipped up, coffee cups warming their hands. Kids on the ice, teenagers maybe 12, 13 years old, chasing a puck, playing the game they love. Coaches shouting from the bench, other kids watching from the sidelines. A completely ordinary scene, the kind of scene that plays out in arenas across this country every single weekend. And then, gunshots. Inside the Dennis M. Lynch Arena in Pawtucket, Rhode Island, on the evening of February 16, 2026, the ordinary became unthinkable in a matter of seconds. People who came to watch a youth hockey game between Coventry and Blackstone Valley found themselves in the middle of something that nobody, not the parents, not the players, not the coaches, not the staff, was ever supposed to experience. 2 people were killed, 3 others were wounded, and the man responsible, a 56-year-old named Robert Dorgan, turned the gun on himself before it was over. A family destroyed, a community traumatized, a rink full of children who will carry what they saw that night for the rest of their lives. This is the story of what happened inside that arena, and it is also the story of what was building long before the first shot was fired. A family history so fractured, so layered with conflict, so loaded with unresolved pain, that it ultimately exploded in one of the most public, most devastating ways imaginable. Let's start with what the police know. Pawtucket Police Chief Tina Goncalves held a press conference after the shooting and used a phrase that investigators often use when they do not yet have the full picture. She called it a family dispute. That is the clinical language. That is the official framing. A family dispute that unfolded inside a hockey arena during a youth game that left 2 people dead and 3 fighting for their lives in a hospital. A federal law enforcement source gave Fox News a sharper, more specific picture. According to that source, Robert Dorgan shot and killed his wife inside that arena. He also shot 3 of his children before turning the gun on himself. This was not a random attack. This was not a stranger who walked into a building looking for victims. This was a man who targeted the people closest to him, his own family, in front of hundreds of witnesses, in front of other children, in front of an entire community that had gathered for nothing more threatening than a hockey game. That is the core of what happened. That is the unbearable, almost incomprehensible center of this tragedy. But to understand how it got there, to understand what drove a 56-year-old man to that arena with a gun, you have to go back. You have to look at the years of conflict, the court documents, the police reports, the family fractures that preceded this moment. Because violence like this does not erupt from nowhere. It builds, slowly, invisibly, and then all at once. The first thread in this story goes back to 2020. That year, Robert Dorgan told police in North Providence something deeply personal. He had undergone gender reassignment surgery. He was living as a transgender woman, and the people in his immediate family, the people who were supposed to be closest to him, were not accepting it. According to court documents cited by local news outlet WPRI, Dorgan reported that his stepfather wanted him removed from the home because of his gender identity. The tensions, the documents show, had escalated significantly after the surgery. This was not a quiet disagreement. This was not a family navigating a difficult transition with grace and patience. This was conflict, open, hostile, threatening conflict. Dorgan told police that his stepfather had made derogatory comments about transgender people and had threatened him with consequences if he did not leave the family home. The stepfather was charged at the time, but those charges were later dropped, and so the conflict remained, unresolved, unaddressed, simmering. That same year, 2020, something else happened. Dorgan accused his own mother of assaulting him. He told police that she had been violent, threatening, and disruptive toward him. His mother was charged with simple assault and disorderly conduct. Those charges were also eventually dropped. So in a single year, Robert Dorgan was caught in the middle of 2 separate confrontations with close family members, his stepfather and his mother, both of which were connected, at least in part, to his identity as a transgender woman, both of which ended not in resolution, but in dropped charges and continued proximity to the same people who had threatened and hurt him. And there was a chilling detail inside one of those conflicts. According to the court documents, Dorgan reported that his stepfather had made a specific threat. If Dorgan did not withdraw his assault complaint against his mother, his stepfather told him that he could expect retaliation. The stepfather allegedly told him that this was another reason to have him killed. Think about that, the word killed, used openly, documented in police reports, reported to law enforcement, and yet, years later, Robert Dorgan was apparently still in orbit of this family, like still connected, still entangled in whatever had never been resolved. Meanwhile, Dorgan's marriage was also unraveling. His ex-wife filed for divorce, and the initial court documents cited some striking language: gender reassignment surgery, narcissistic personality traits, personality disorders. That was how she framed the grounds for the split. Later, the stated reason was changed to irreconcilable differences, the standard legal catch-all that papers over whatever is actually happening. The divorce was finalized in 2021. At that point, Dorgan was living in Jacksonville, Florida, working as a truck driver. So here is the picture that emerges from the documents: a person who had gone through a profound personal transformation, a person who had faced rejection and hostility from the people who were supposed to love them unconditionally, a person whose family life had collapsed, stepfather threatening violence, mother in a physical altercation, marriage falling apart, divorce papers citing his identity as part of the reason. A person who spent years, it seems, orbiting the wreckage of family relationships that had never fully healed. And then on February 16, 2026, Robert Dorgan walked into a hockey rink in Pawtucket, Rhode Island. The police have been careful. Chief Goncalves said clearly that investigators had not yet publicly identified a motive. She also said that the prior family disputes documented in those court records had not been officially linked to what happened at the arena. Those are important caveats. We do not know with certainty exactly what drove Dorgan to that building on that night. We do not know what the argument was about, whether it was connected to his identity, to the divorce, to custody, to money, to something that happened that day, or to something that had been festering for years. What we know is what happened, and what happened is devastating. 2 people are dead, among them, according to the federal law enforcement source, Dorgan's wife, the woman he had once stood at an altar with, the woman who had borne his children, the woman whose divorce papers had once listed his identity as grounds for the dissolution of their marriage. 3 of their children were shot. Their children, the people who, regardless of everything that had fractured in this family, were caught in the crossfire of something they had no power to stop. And there were other children there, dozens, maybe hundreds of young hockey players and their families, kids who came to the arena that night to play a game and instead witnessed something that will reshape how they understand the world. Violence does not stay contained to its intended targets. It spreads. It soaks into everyone present. Every parent who was sitting in those bleachers when the shots rang out will spend the rest of their lives wondering what would have happened if they had been sitting a few rows closer. Every child who is on that ice will carry the sound of those gunshots somewhere deep inside them. This is what gun violence does. It does not end when the shooting stops. It ripples outward, through families and communities and entire generations, in ways that are almost impossible to fully account for. Now let's talk about the broader context, because this story exists inside a moment in America where questions about identity, family conflict, and violence are intensely charged. The fact that Robert Dorgan was transgender will, for some people, become the entire story. There will be those who use this tragedy to make arguments about gender identity in one direction or the other, and in doing so, they will reduce a complex human being to a symbol and reduce a family catastrophe to a talking point. That would be a mistake, not because the details of Dorgan's identity are irrelevant. Clearly, based on the court documents, his gender transition was a significant source of conflict within his family, and that conflict is part of the record. But because turning this into an ideological story erases the actual human reality of what happened. The actual human reality is this: a family was in pain for a long time. The pain was documented, it was reported to police, it showed up in court filings, and the systems that exist to address family conflict and prevent escalation, the criminal justice system, the family court system, the mental health support structures that are supposed to catch people before they reach a breaking point. Those systems, for whatever reason, did not prevent what happened on February 16th. The charges got dropped. The conflicts remained unresolved. the people involved continued to exist in the same family ecosystem, with all of its unhealed wounds and unaddressed grievances, and eventually something broke. That is not a story about transgender identity. That is a story about what happens when family conflict is allowed to escalate without meaningful intervention. That is a story about the gap between what our systems are supposed to do and what they actually accomplish. That is a story that plays out in different forms in families across this country every single day, and sometimes, on the worst days, it ends in a hockey rink with 2 people dead and 3 children in the hospital. We have to be able to hold all of it at once. The complexity of Dorgan's personal history, the documented conflict, the failure of the systems that were supposed to help, the specific, irreducible tragedy of the people who died and were wounded, the trauma of the children who were on that ice, the horror that the entire community of Pawtucket is now sitting with. We have to be able to say, this was a human being who was struggling. This was also a human being who did something unforgivable. Both of those things can be true. The pain that preceded the violence does not excuse the violence. The violence does not erase the pain that preceded it. Understanding how something happened is not the same as justifying it. Robert Dorgan's name will now be attached to one of the worst things a person can do. He will be remembered by most people as the man who walked into a hockey rink and opened fire on his own family. That is the record. That is what happened. But somewhere behind that record is a life that went sideways a long time ago. A transition that cost him relationships. A family that fractured under the weight of changes they were not equipped to handle. A system that documented the warning signs and then walked away. A person who reached a point of such complete desperation and brokenness that a Monday evening hockey game became the site of irreversible tragedy. None of that explains it. None of that makes it okay. None of that brings back the people who were killed, or erases the trauma of the people who were wounded, or gives back to those children the safety they felt before they walked into that building. But if we do not look at all of it, if we just take the headline and move on, then we learn nothing. And if we learn nothing, then the next family that is visibly, documentably falling apart will get the same response from the same systems. Charges filed, charges dropped, conflicts unresolved, warning signs ignored, and eventually another arena, another school, another parking lot, another ordinary place turned into a crime scene. This country has had that conversation so many times that many people have stopped believing it leads anywhere. But the people sitting in that hockey rink on February 16th, the parents who grabbed their kids and ran, the teenagers who were on the ice when the shots started, the families who are now trying to explain to their children what they saw, those people deserve more than a conversation that goes nowhere. They deserve honesty about how this happened. They deserve accountability from the systems that are supposed to protect people. They deserve a real reckoning with what it takes to keep families from reaching the point of no return. 2 people were killed in Pawtucket, Rhode Island, on a Monday evening during a youth hockey game. A family had been in documented conflict for years before it happened. The warning signs were there, and now it is too late. That is the story. And the only way to honor the people who were lost is to refuse to look away from it.